welcome to the channel, and in this video I wanted to talk about the Underworld series. I recently did a marathon of these movies and wanted to do a little bit of a retrospective along with showing off all the films in my collection, so let's get into the video. First Underworld was released back in 2003, on my birthday actually. I bought this steelbook at an FYE that was going out of business a few years ago. I had already owned this, but since this was marked down significantly, I couldn't pass it up. I'm not sure who the artist was who did these steelbooks. I googled it to give them a shout out, but just couldn't find anything. Their signature is on the back and it looks like it says Barry, so good job Barry. This was part of Sony's pop art collection and I collected a few of them. Sony did do the rest of the Underworld series in this style, but good luck finding Blood Wars for a decent price. That must have been a pretty limited release, but I'll give kudos to Sony for making a series of steelbooks for collectors that'll look uniform together. This steelbook came with the unrated extended cut, which adds a little more than 10 minutes to the runtime. I might have seen the original cut of the film when I first saw this movie, but this extended cut just adds a few more scenes, and there's nothing that seems like it was too risque for the MPA that needed to be cut. Honestly, I think this movie could have used some more trimming, because on my most recent rewatch, it felt like the pacing was dragging at certain points. There is a lot of lore that they set up in this movie, so many scenes are very exposition heavy, so it may have to do with that. They also go to and fro from the Vampire Mansion at least like 15 times in this movie. They really got a lot of use out of that location. What really makes the movie work is the cast. Kate Beckinsale is great and she's completely believable as this badass vampire death dealer, and has good chemistry with Scott Speedman, who does a good job as Michael, who's the fish out of water character, as he gets embroiled in this centuries-old feud between the vampires and the Lycans. Michael Sheen is also great as Lucien, the leader of the Lycans, and is made to be believed as the villain of the movie. Bill Nye, not the science guy. Bill Nye is the real standout in this movie as the vampire elder Victor. He has such screen presence, and I think it has a lot to do with his enunciation and the way that he speaks.
But the abomination growing in her womb was a betrayal of me and of the Covenant.
He would go on to do something similar with Davy Jones in the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. I think he has a lot of fun in these movies, and maybe that's why he's played a villain in so many movies. I don't know if I would say this is my favorite in the series. Probably is the best film, but I really enjoyed 2 and 3 just as much as this one. I also own the first movie on UMD, which doesn't have the extended cut. I think this might have been the way I saw this movie originally. I definitely got moments of it on TV, but I'm pretty sure this was how I saw this movie from beginning to end. Sony put the most effort into their UMD releases, but I guess that's to be expected since this format was for their own handheld. I like that they would add interior artwork for their releases. It gives it more of a reason to not just throw the case out. And now, outside of boutique labels, we don't get interior artwork, but movies usually come in eco-friendly cases now, so I guess that's good. Underworld Evolution followed up the original a few years later, and I bought the steelbook the same day as the first one. They were so marked down that I said fuck it, I'll get them both, but on the other hand, now there's not an FYE even remotely close to me. Anyway, this steelbook was done by, I don't know, I'm just gonna call him Barry. While I'm not blown away by the artwork, it's still cool to get an original piece of art that's not just Photoshop with a bunch of actors' faces on it. The art depicts a flashback scene, which is unfortunately the only scene that features Bill Nye. Tony Curran plays Marcus, and I love the look of him in his full vampiric form. He might not be a scene stealer like Bill Nye in the first one, but he's definitely more intimidating and poses more of a threat to Celine and Michael. I like this movie more on this rewatch. It's much more of a breezy watch, and while it does add more to the lore of the first one, it doesn't just get bogged down with scenes that have a bunch of exposition, since the first one did all that heavy lifting. There's far more action sequences that pad out the runtime. The climax is pretty fun and kind of plays out as like a tag team match with Celine and Michael taking on Marcus and William Corvinus. The soundtrack to the movie is also pretty good. It had remixes of bands that I was really into at the time, like Alkaline Trio, Census Fail, Aiden, and My Chemical Romance. I would also watch her Portrait in Black by Atreyu's music video like all the time back in the day. So I guess this movie is pretty nostalgic for me. It might be my favorite in the series. I also own the UMD that I bought used at a GameStop. I remember buying this at a GameStop in Boston while visiting my brother at college. Not having the original case kind of drives my OCD crazy, so someday maybe I'll track down a copy with the original case. For the third movie in the series, they decided to make it a prequel, and I remember buying this used at a Newberry Comics, and I would have said this was my favorite in the series up until this most recent rewatch, and it's also the one I've probably have seen the most. I would always catch this on TV. Prequels are hard to pull off or even justify since we already know the outcome, but I enjoyed this because of the great performances by Bill Nye and Michael Sheen. One thing that stuck out to me this viewing was how unconventional of a choice Michael Sheen is as an action star, because normally you'd get a hunky dude, but Sheen is still believable in the role. He didn't really have to do any action scenes in the first movie. Rona Mitra was a good addition as Victor's daughter Sonia. Apparently she originally auditioned for the role of Celine, but lost out to Beckinsale. Patrick Tatopoulos took over directing duties from Len Wiseman, and this was his first time directing a movie. He mainly did creature design and was responsible for the look of the Lycans in the first film. He hasn't directed a film since, but still does special effects and production design. He was also a judge on the show Face Off that I used to watch all the time back on the Sci-Fi Channel before streaming took over. I thought he did a good job and it feels in line with the first two. It did come out when every action movie had very fast editing, shaky cam, and close-up shots. So it's hard going back to this period after seeing modern action movies, which have gone away from that style and usually have to be on par with John Wick. The soundtrack is also pretty solid. I still listen to the remix of Alkaline Trio's Over and Out to this day. I also own Rise of the Lycans on UMD. And this was how I watched this movie on my marathon. I was in Florida for Hurricane Milton and had my PSP charged, so when the power went out, I was still able to watch this movie. I also picked this up at GameStop, and this time it came with the original case, which is pretty much identical to the Blu-ray. Even the interior artwork is the same. I wish they ported over at least some of the special features. This would be the last movie in this series to be released on this format. By the time Awakening came out, the PSP was phased out in favor of Sony's new handheld, the PS Vita. Next is Underworld Awakening, and it was released back in 2012. This was the first Underworld movie I saw in theaters, and this might be the first Underworld movie I bought on Blu-ray. I had a PS3 by this point and started to make the jump from DVD to Blu-ray. I was less interested in the upgrade in picture and audio quality and just more interested in the exclusive bonus features. I also like how Sony movies had interior artwork. Very few studios took advantage of the transparent cases. Sony would eventually get lazy and stop doing that, and you'll see in the very next entry in the series. This movie and Blood Wars, I always have trouble remembering the plots for. What I'm able to recall is that this movie had a super Lycan, and they ditched the Michael character, who was pretty integral to those first two movies, since he's the first hybrid between Lycans and vampires, because he's the last descendant of Alexander Corvinus. I looked up why they didn't bring Scott Speedman back, and figured maybe it was scheduling conflict or something, but a producer said that they wanted to tell a mother-daughter story in this movie. In reality, it sounds like either Scott Speedman didn't want to return, or the producers were like, fuck that dude. Which I think it's the latter because of what they do to that character in the next movie. This movie feels like they struggled to come up with a story for this movie because other than introducing the Super Lycan and the fact that Celine is now a mother, it doesn't expand on the lore and just feels like, hey, let's make another Underworld movie to make a quick buck. It's not a bad movie by any means, and Kate Beckinsale is more than capable of carrying a movie, and she proves that she can still kick some ass in this film. The final entry in this series, Underworld Blood Wars, came out 5 years later and came out the same month as the final entry in the Mila Jovovich Resident Evil series. These series tend to be pretty linked to each other, probably because they came out around the same time, and they're both action horror movies starring badass women. And despite critics not liking each entry, they're all moderately successful at the box office to at least warrant a sequel. I bought the standard Blu-ray when it first came out. The Best Buy exclusive Steelbook sold out pretty quick and had artwork by the same artist who did the prior Steelbooks. I wish it came with a physical comic instead of it being a digital one, but that's just wishful thinking because they didn't really try hard with this release. I mean, it doesn't even have interior artwork like the previous ones. This movie feels like they tried a little bit more because the story doesn't feel as simple as the prior one. And they ditched the mother-daughter story from Awakening, so much for that. And they killed Michael off screen, so I think I'm right when it comes to the filmmakers not liking Scott Speedman. The characters' motivations are a bit more three-dimensional, along with the characters themselves, but something I noticed this time watching it was, why are the Lycans just so reluctant to change in this film? I'm sure the real reason was budget restraints, but every action sequence has them mainly firing guns, and it's in scenes where they're fighting in close quarters. Like, I would understand using guns for a ranged attack, but they're always fighting in a secluded area, and like, why not just go full Lycan and you'll probably end up winning the fight. I did enjoy this movie a bit more this time around, but will I remember the plot in a few weeks? I guess we'll see. Thank you for watching the video. I think this series deserves more credit than what it's been given. In an age where people have been championing for more female-led franchises, this one came out at a time where it was basically just this and the Resident Evil movies. I mean, maybe they're not stellar films, but it's proof that women can kick ass and be a box office draw. So if you haven't seen these films in a while, then maybe give them a rewatch, or at least the first three. Let me know how you would rank this series, or whether you prefer these movies or the Resident Evil movies. I'll see you guys in the next video, but until then, have a movie time.